Hi, everybody. I'm Anthony Ruggiano, and I want to welcome everybody to Reformed Gangsters, and I also want to welcome my friend Hollywood Wade to the show.
Good to see you again, my friend.
Good to see you.
Well, one of the last times we were here, we done a little segment called Behind the Gangster, where we kind of compare movies to real life, and I think it come off real well. The video done real well on your channel, mine as well, so I thought we would hit up another one. Jimmy Burke, what do you say?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. It did well. I think I enjoyed it because, you know, I have personal relationships with these people that they made movies about, so it's kind of weird sometimes for me but it's fun.
Right. Well, see, you know, you meet Jimmy Conway in the movie. They called him Jimmy Conway. Obviously, that's not his real name, but you meet him like he's already grown and had done a lot. But from what I understand, and you may be able to shed some light on this, he was orphaned at a young age and had a very rough childhood. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he was orphaned. He was a foster child. He was abused as a young boy. Mm-hmm. Actually, his foster parents, he caused them to crash in a car when he was a young child.
I heard that.
You heard that story, right? That's all true story. He was a foster child. His mother was a prostitute, so he really never knew who his father was. And how I know all this is because I was friends with him and his children, his daughter Kathy, his sons Frankie and Jesse. He named his two kids after Frank and Jesse James because they were his idols. Yeah, but that's all true. He was a foster child. He was abused physically, you know, sexually. Unfortunately, he had a terrible childhood, and you know, and I guess it made him who he was, you know.
Right.
I ran across him. I mean, unfortunately, last time I saw him was at his funeral. I mean, he passed away in prison, and I went to his funeral because I knew the family. But yeah, that's all true. That's all definitely true. And I think the reason why De Niro didn't use Burke, I know before they started filming the movie, Robert De Niro had reached out to Jimmy, who was up in, I think he was in Dannemora at the time. He was in New York State prison. And they reached out to him if he would allow De Niro to go there and visit him, and he said no. And De Niro actually met with his family, I think in a diner on Crosby Boulevard or somewhere, and all they asked of De Niro was that they left Frankie, the murder of the son Frankie, out of the movie, and they did that. Lucchese and De Niro left anything about Frankie out of the movie because, as we know, his son Frankie was murdered by Tito the barber, who later also got murdered. So it was, and they did. They respected that, and they left it out of the movie.
Now, and I know he kind of became, you know, got his start. People noticed him. He took, I think, a pinch for writing bad checks, and he got a little stretchy, and he didn't rat on anybody. He didn't say anything, and that obviously gets you noticed by some of the higher-ups. Paul Vario took a liking to him, and that's kind of how he started to rise up the ranks. But one question before we get into true, false, and Goodfellas is a story that I heard that was pretty brutal. The night before he got married, they said that he went over to his fixing-to-be wife's house, to her ex-boyfriend's house, and paid him a visit with a chainsaw. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that was always talked about in my neighborhood. It was always rumored. Do I know if he did it or not? Knowing him, he probably did do it. You know, I mean, he did do it with the rumor, you know, pertains to, but I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, he was a vicious killer. I mean, you know, people that were around my father had an incident with him where he went into a bar and two kids that were my father, Ronnie One-Arm, who later became a captain in the Gambino family, and this other kid, Frankie Geesh, were in this bar, and he walked in the bar and he took a guy in the kitchen and he killed the guy, and then he made them help him put the guy's body in the trunk of his car, and he left. And later on, about a week or two later, my father sent for him and told him make sure he left them two kids alone because they were afraid he was going to kill them. So he was vicious, and would he have done that? Definitely. Did I hear that rumor? Yeah, I did.
Now, in the movie, they do a lot of hijacking. It seems like JFK was a cash register for you guys. Was that like solidified for one family, or did every family had a piece? How was that divided up? Because it seemed like that was what Jimmy, you know, was a lot of. There was hijack.
No, as far as the hijacking, no. My father had a crew that hijacked trucks. Jimmy, Paul Vario had a crew. The only thing that was controlled in the airport was the union, was the Teamsters union, was controlled by Paul Vario. This guy, Frank DeWap, he was a wise guy with Paul Vario. They ran the union, out of Kennedy Airport, and later on they were going to indict it for that. But as far as hijacking trucks, that was a free for all.
Okay.
I mean, I had a lot of stuff back then that came out of the airport. A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
Well, and we touched on this when we covered the Tommy DeSimone in his episode, but the Billy Bats killing has been linked to why Tommy was taken out, or one of the reasons. I know there was a lot more. That may have just been the icing on the cake. But in the movie, it portrays De Niro being just as much a part of it as Tommy. If that was true, and I'm not saying it was because obviously I wasn't there, but if that was true, why wasn't Jimmy, entangled in that? Because as we both know, when you kill a made man, that is a no-no. Right. In this business. Was he able to skate on that? How was that?
I think Tommy perpetrated the whole incident. I think so. That sort of gave Jimmy a pass.
Okay.
But like you said, there's more to it. Like, not only did Tommy participate in killing Billy Bats, who was a made guy, there was also this guy named Foxy from my neighborhood that was very close with the guy. He was with the Gottis. He was a hijacker, big-time hijacker, and they were friends. Tommy and Foxy were friends, and unfortunately, when Tommy was in prison, Foxy had an affair with Tommy's wife.
Okay.
So when Tommy got out of prison, Tommy killed Foxy. So I think between Billy Bats and Foxy and whatever else he was doing, I know the Gottis and the Gambinos forced that issue to kill Tommy, because what happened was after Tommy got killed, my father who was very close with Paul Vario. They were in Springfield, Missouri, in the federal prison out in Springfield. It was a hospital prison where actually John Gotti died. And I remember in the visiting room, Paulie told my father that they wanted Tommy handed over to them, and Paulie told them that he cleans his own dirty laundry, and they did Tommy themselves, the Vario crew. So it was a number of things, and I think Jimmy got a pass because he was Jimmy. He was, Paulie protected him, and Tommy was the sacrificial lamb.
And another interesting thing that Jimmy was involved in that some people know about it, but the Boston College point scandal, that wasn't in the movie, but those guys made a ton of money with that. I mean, they wound up, I think they did take a case on it later on, but they made a lot of money with that Boston.
Oh, yeah, well, that Henry gave that up. Henry Hill gave that up. Yeah, but I knew about that when it was going on. I mean, Paulie Vario's crew was very involved in gambling. They had a lot of, they with Big E's, they were like competition with, we used to go to racetracks and bang out big, they used to call it the Super Perfecta. We had a system, it was 2 races, and you had to pick 4 horses that, or 4 dogs, 4 that came in, and then take that ticket and exchange it for the next race. And we used to buy up the tickets, and sometimes we would hit the whole pool. So they were into all that, and yeah, they were fixing races in Boston. Basketball games in Boston, and Henry gave it up. As a matter of fact, they got convicted for that. Yeah. They went to prison for it. Yeah, so that's all real. That all really took place. I guess how much could they put in a movie? I mean, how much? You got to leave something out.
Yeah. Lufthansa was a huge point in that movie because that's kind of when everything started to go south. Even though the robbery went off perfect, but then one by one in the movie you see Stax Edwards go, and then it just starts clipping them one by one. Was that kind of how it really started? I know Stax did leave the truck, which was going to start, so I can kind of see Jimmy's thought process of taking out Stax to try to cut the trail cold. But then after that, do you think it was more of a situation to where greed maybe did play a part, as in why give these guys these shares if I can just kill them? Or was it trying to make sure nobody connected him to the robbery? Which one was more prevalent?
You know what? I think it had a lot to do with both. I mean, he didn't trust nobody. I mean, the rumor was that it was because he didn't want to give nobody their end, which I wouldn't put past him because that's the life. And it was a little bit of both. I mean, the wig guy, he kept asking for his money. They didn't trust him. They killed him. Stax solely got killed because of what he did with the van. I mean, I knew Stax. I had a beef with Stax years before that in an after-hour club in South Ozone Park, but we became friends after that. So, yeah, he got killed because of the van, and everybody else got killed because Jimmy had the money. I mean, Jimmy had the money. He didn't want to probably give nobody his end. He didn't trust none of them, and he got paranoid. You got to understand, too, which is not spoke about. It's always kept under wraps, which I don't know why. These guys were all blowing coke, freebasing coke. I don't know. I mean, they were all drinking and doing drugs. I mean, it plays on you. You know what I mean? So Jimmy was probably catching delusions and being greedy, and they all went. Yeah. And Paulie had to give the okay. And that's another thing nobody talks about. Jimmy couldn't just kill these people on his own. He had to get permission. These guys were all with Paulie Vario. Jimmy was not a wise guy.
Yeah, Jimmy was Irish, right?
Right. Yeah. So he had to go. He couldn't just randomly kill people because in the mob, even though, you're murdering people, there's protocol. My father used to tell me there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. You know what I mean? You have to get permission. You got to put it on record. You can't just randomly kill people because you're going to get killed. So he had to go to Paulie and say, listen, I want these guys got to go. And Paulie had to give him the permission. And why would Paulie? The only way Paulie would give him the permission is if Jimmy went there with a shoebox full of $100 bills and went, Paulie, listen, this is for you, and these guys got to go. So.
Makes it a real easy decision.
Right.
Now, the Lufthansa heist pulled down, I think it was reported, there's been varying reports, but somewhere around 15.8 million, which was one of the highest at the time. I'll tell you a quick story. Some guys where I lived at in South Carolina, like 4 or 5 guys come up with this not so bright idea to rob an armored car. One of the guys that worked for the armored car company was in it, and they did. It was 9.8 million. And when I heard that number, I knew some of the guys that was involved in it. I didn't know they were doing it, but I knew them. And when I heard it, I said, geez, I said, you guys beat the Lufthansa number. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And they had to leave a lot. They didn't even realize how much was going to be on the truck. They had to leave a lot in the truck. But so towards the end of the film, after Lufthansa, after everybody starts to go, as it starts to wind down, everybody starts dealing drugs. Henry Hill starts dealing drugs. Paul Vario's telling him not to, but Jimmy's also doing it. It seems like, as we mentioned earlier, it seems like Jimmy gets a pass again. Or did they know that he was dealing drugs? Or was he dealing drugs?
Well, Henry definitely was dealing drugs. And I definitely, Jimmy was getting a piece because Henry wouldn't do nothing without Jimmy. That's like the unwritten law. Everybody was dealing drugs and everybody was paying no mind to it. Did Jimmy get a pass? Of course he got a pass. But they were all dealing drugs. I mean, they were partners. They were all whacking it up. I mean, I know Henry was Henry became an addict. Henry was, even after Henry cooperated, when he would go on talk shows drunk and, so he definitely had an issue. And everybody was dealing drugs. Everybody was getting high. I mean, I got high with them. I mean, Tommy DeSimone used to pick me up by my father's bar, and as soon as I got in his car, he handed me a package. I mean, they were all using, they were all dealing, they were all stealing. It was just crazy. And even Lufthansa, people getting back to that for a second, my father fenced all the jewelry for Lufthansa, so that was another $1 million in jewelry they had. My father and his partner Tony Lee, they fenced all the jewelry for Lufthansa about a year after the robbery, and they were all using. I mean, it's a funny story because they wanted me to. Once Tommy DeSimone and Anthony Stabile, who was another psychopathic killer, wanted to get high with me one day, and I told them no. And my brother, to this day, still teases me. He tells me, that's the only time you ever refused getting high with. I said, yeah, I'm going to go with them so they could catch a delusion. Oh, God forbid his father finds out. We better kill this kid so Fatty Andy don't find out about it. I said, I'm going to just go with them. I told him. My brother, to this day, he still teases me. So they were all dealing. They were all, Paulie loved Jimmy and he loved Henry. And even in Springfield, Missouri, my father hated Henry Hill. For some reason, my father never liked Henry. And Henry knew it. So Henry would stay away from my father. My father was around. Even with me, when I would run into Henry, he would hello and goodbye me. He would never really converse with me or anything. He would just acknowledge me. But and in Springfield, Missouri, my father used to tell Paulie, I told you about this guy. And Paulie used to go, please, Andy, don't break my balls over this Henry. I know, you never liked him because Henry put Paulie in jail. Yeah. So it's crazy. Before
we hopped on camera, you told me a little story about one of your first girlfriends.
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, I dated Kathy Burke. She was a waitress. And so, I got to say one thing about Jimmy Burke and his kids. I mean, we were all dear friends, and I have all the respect in the world for his children. They all, they're business people, lawyers. I mean, they always worked. No matter how much money Jimmy made or who Jimmy was, his kids always worked. Jesse and Kathy always worked. Kathy now has a jewelry business in Manhattan for years. I think Jesse might have even became an attorney now. I'm not sure, but they always worked. Kathy worked from a young age. So I guess that was good. I mean, I wish my father did that with me, made me go to work. Unfortunately for me, when I was 16, I went to work for my father in a blackjack game.
Well, the other
we all
one
know where that got me.
The other one he followed in the business because he was part in the Lufthansa.
He was the
driving
driver.
A crash car.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Frankie did follow his father into life, and he was killed by this guy Tito, the barber. He was a barber in this barber shop, father and son, that John Gotti used to go to. We all went to it. It was like one of the first salons, men's salons in our neighborhood. So it was like, so we all the wise guys went. You know, he was in an after-hour joint one night, and Frankie was a little abusive. I mean, I liked Frankie. We got along good, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, he would drink a little bit. He would get a little abusive, and he abused this guy, Tito. You know, my father always told me, don't underestimate anybody. Anybody could kill you, and that's pretty much what happened. You know, he was a barber. Frankie was Jimmy's son, and he started abusing this guy, Tito, and Tito was lit up, you know, on coke, and he was a big coke fiend and alcohol, and he left. He went, got a gun, and Frankie left that night, and when Frankie walked out of the after-hour joint, Tito shot him and murdered him. And Tito's brother-in-law was a wise guy with the Colombos named Dominic Cataldo. A lot of people don't know this. And Tito ran away after he killed Frankie Burke. Tito ran away. And Dominic Cataldo, who was a wise guy with the Colombos, who was Tito's brother-in-law, allegedly straightened it out, because what happened was 3 weeks later, I'm in this bar, because me and Tito were tight. I'm in this bar called, it was on Flight 116. It was on 116th Street and 101st Avenue. And I'm in there one night, it was in the summer, and the door opened and Tito walked in. And he walked in, I'll never forget, he walked in and he sees me, hugs me, and I tell him, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, my brother-in-law straight. I said, you killed Jimmy Burke's son. What are you, crazy? What are you doing here? He goes, no, my brother-in-law, Dominic, straightened it all out. I said, your brother-in-law straightened it all out. I said, all right. So we had a drink, and then he wanted to go to an after-hour club in Jamaica that Jojo Carrazza owned, who was the consigliere of the Gambino family. He owned this after-hour joint. So Tito wanted to go there with me. So we walked out of the flight, and Tito says, come on, drive with me. I said, that's all right. I'll meet you there, because I wasn't getting in the car with him. So we went to the after-hour club, and we hung out there. And then 2 days later, Tito was in his barber shop, and two guys walked in with an Uzi, and they blasted him with an Uzi. So his brother-in-law, at the end of the day, Dominic set him up.
Yeah.
You know, Dominic set him up. So, you know, that's a little story that, you know, I haven't really talked about much, but, and that's why, you know, when I see these movies and we talk about these movies, it's kind of weird, because, you know, I know these people, and I know, you know, I know how they died and when they died, and it's just, it's sometimes it's like an out-of-body experience for me.
I think to close it out, it's a good question here. We covered it. He wasn't a made guy. He wasn't Italian. He wasn't Irishman. But I would say probably from all the research I've done, probably one of the most respected Irishmen ever in La Cosa Nostra.
Without a doubt. Definitely, without a doubt. You know, because what happens is, they put, like, Paulie puts the word out, and the head of the family puts the word out, like, they're going to get respect. They're allowed to sit down. They're getting respected as captains and what, like Joe Watts is the same way. I don't know, you know, people are familiar with the name Joe Watts. He was one of John Gotti's hitmen. He was English, and the word went out that he was to be respected like a captain. So even though they're not officially made, they don't have the ceremony, they're getting the respect of a made member because of who they are and what they did. So they, you know, yeah, but Jimmy was definitely the most well-respected Irish guy in the mob in my lifetime anyway. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps this one up, man, for another episode of Behind the Gangster on Jimmy Burke. I think it went well, my friend.
Oh, yeah, it definitely went well. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Reformed Gangsters, and I'll see you soon.